wind tore at his coat as Thomas McCall stepped out of the post office, envelope in hand. The paper was creased and stained, but the handwriting was careful, like someone who tried very hard not to shake. He didn't read it again. He'd memorized every line. I don't speak, not since the fire. If you want someone whole, don't answer this letter. But I can cook, I can clean, I can work, and I don't complain. All I ask is silence and no closed doors. Others might have laughed at a bride who couldn't talk, called it a curse, not a marriage. But Thomas had long ago learned the weight of words, and he didn't need them to know truth. He sent for her. 2 weeks later, she stepped off the wagon. She was small, thin as a fence rail. Her dress hung on her like it belonged to someone else. Burn marks peeked out from her collar. Her eyes didn't rise above the ground. She didn't speak, just stood there, gripping a worn satchel like it was the only thing keeping her upright. He didn't ask her name. Instead, he said, "The house is up that road. You can ride or walk." She walked. The next morning, she rose before the sun. Thomas found her outside, hauling water from the well with sleeves rolled up and knuckles red. She moved like someone who was used to work and used to being watched. Her movements were careful, quiet, as if the wrong noise might bring a hand down on her shoulder. He didn't speak, just took the bucket from her hands and carried it inside. She paused in the doorway, staring. There were no locks on any door, no latch on the pantry, no bolt on the inside of her room, no chains, no rules nailed to the wall. On the kitchen table, a plate waited. Fresh bread, jam, and a boiled egg. Beside it, a note in blocky handwriting. If you're hungry, eat. She didn't touch it at first, just stood there, as if waiting for someone to yell. When the silence held, she sat. She ate slowly, each bite measured. Her hands trembled, not from cold, from something deeper, older. He watched from the barn window, just long enough to see her shoulders drop, just slightly. That night, she found a book on the edge of her bed, a worn novel, pages soft with age, a wildflower tucked between chapter 12 and 13. No note, no explanation. She picked it up with shaking fingers, then clutched it to her chest, and for the first time since she arrived, she smiled. 3 days passed. She moved like a ghost through the house, always early to rise, always cleaning things that weren't dirty. She never spoke, never knocked, and she never sat with her back to the door. But Thomas noticed. When he saddled his horse in the morning, he'd find the tools already laid out. His coffee was always made, strong and bitter, just the way he liked, though he'd never said. She paid attention, not out of care, but survival. That morning, a windstorm rolled in fast. It howled through the rafters and slammed the back door open with a bang. Thomas, just coming in from the barn, heard it, and then heard something else. Porcelain shattering. He rushed inside. She was on the floor in the corner, arms over her head, shaking like a trapped animal. At her feet lay the broken mug he'd left for her, a blue one she seemed to favor. He didn't speak, didn't step closer, just knelt down slowly, picked up each shard, and dropped them one by one into the trash. Then he turned, reached into the cabinet, and set another mug on the table. The same tea, the same sugar. Then he left. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in years. But she sat in that chair for a long, long time, hands curled around the warm ceramic, like it meant something, like she hadn't been punished for once. That night, she left her door open a crack. Not much, but just enough to say, I see you, and maybe, thank you. The storm passed by morning, but it left the air heavy and the earth soft beneath their boots. Thomas saddled 2 horses. When she stepped onto the porch, still drying her hands on her apron, he simply nodded toward the smaller mare, calm and speckled gray, her reins loose, her eyes gentle. I figured, he said softly, you might want to see something other than these 4 walls. She didn't answer, but she didn't run either. He waited, quiet, unhurried, letting her breathe. It took her nearly 10 minutes to approach the horse, 10 more before she dared to place a hand on its side. The mare didn't flinch. Neither did he. He didn't touch her, just mounted his own horse, slow and sure, and waited until she climbed up on her own. They rode in silence, the field stretching wide beneath a soft blue sky. The sun hung low, golden and kind. A hawk circled above them. She didn't look at him, but every so often she glanced at the horizon, eyes wide, unblinking, as though afraid it might disappear if she blinked. When the wind caught her braid and pulled it loose, she didn't stop to fix it. She didn't hide her face. By the time they reached the creek, she was breathing easier, shoulders loose, hands steady on the reins. He dismounted first and helped her down, not by grabbing, not by lifting. He simply offered his hand. She didn't take it, but she also didn't shy away when he stood beside her, close enough for warmth, far enough for safety. The water gurgled between them, soft and alive, and for the first time she laughed. It was barely a sound, more breath than voice, but it broke something open in the air. He looked at her. She didn't look away. That night after supper, Thomas went to put away the linens. The old oak chest in the hallway creaked as he opened it, stiff with age, filled with folded cloth and odds and ends from before he'd taken over the ranch. He wasn't looking for anything, but under a stack of blankets, something small and out of place caught his eye. A piece of faded fabric, soft and lilac-colored. A ribbon, worn, frayed at the ends, tied into a bow, then untied, then retied, again and again, judging by the loose creases. He didn't remember putting it there. It wasn't his mother's. It didn't belong to the ranch, and it sure as hell wasn't his. He turned it over in his hands slowly. A faint scent clung to it. Lavender, maybe, or something gentler. She must have tucked it away when she arrived. He left it on the edge of the chest, visible but untouched. Later that night, when she passed by on her way to her room, she stopped short. Her eyes went straight to it. Her breath caught, just barely, but enough for him to notice. He didn't speak, didn't explain. She stepped forward like the ribbon was glass, picked it up with both hands, clutched it to her chest, and then she did something he never expected. She looked at him. Really looked, like she saw him for the first time. Not just a figure in the distance, not a man to avoid, but someone standing still in the dark, waiting for her to decide what he meant. She gave the faintest nod. It wasn't permission, not yet, but it was something close to trust. The morning was unusually quiet. Even the wind held its breath. Thomas found her on the porch, not hiding in the shadows this time, but sitting on the edge of the old rocking chair, hands folded in her lap. The ribbon was tied at her wrist now, a small anchor maybe, or a promise to herself. She didn't flinch when he came out, didn't move away when he sat on the other end of the porch. Instead, she opened her notebook. He hadn't seen her carry one before, but it was there now, resting on her knees, pages worn and corners curled. She wrote something, slowly. The pencil moved like it had weight. She turned the notebook around. "Do you want to know?" That was all it said, 5 words trembling at the edges. He looked at them, then at her. Her hands were still, but her eyes were storm clouds waiting to burst. Thomas nodded. She flipped to the next page. Then the next. Page after page of drawings. Not words, drawings. Shaky sketches of places. A barn, a dark room with a locked door, a river, a man's hand, too big, too close, a girl curled up under a table, a face without eyes, and then a horse, untouched, wild, beautiful, its mane free in the wind. She paused there. Thomas understood. Not everything, not the full weight of what had been done to her, but enough to know what it meant. She had been broken before anyone ever gave her the chance to run free. He took the notebook gently, closed it, set it between them. Then without a word, he untied the ribbon from her wrist, tied it carefully around the notebook, and placed it in her hands. Her breath caught. He didn't speak, just looked at her and stayed. And for the first time, her shoulders eased. Not much, but enough. The sun had just begun its climb when Thomas found her already in the stables. She wasn't doing much, just standing near the mare's stall, watching the horse through the wooden slats, as if memorizing how breath moved in the animal's chest. He didn't say anything, just stepped inside and began his morning routine. Water, feed, fresh hay. He saw her flinch when the pitchfork scraped the wall, not as sharply as before, but the echo still lived somewhere in her bones. When he finished, he turned to her and held out a worn brush, bristles soft from years of use. She stared at it like it might bite. "No rush," he said quietly. "Only if you want to." A long silence. Then she reached for it. Their fingers didn't touch, but came close. That was enough to make her hesitate, but she took the brush. The mare stirred, shifting her weight. The girl stepped forward, one uncertain movement at a time. When the brush touched the horse's side, the mare let out a calm breath, like she recognized something in her. She brushed the horse in small, careful strokes, her lips slightly parted, like the rhythm was breathing for her. Thomas stayed back, quietly filling the trough, but he saw it, how her fingers slowly unclenched, how the tightness in her shoulders began to melt under each stroke, how she reached a little farther, then paused, startled at herself. When she turned to look at him, her eyes didn't hold fear, only disbelief. She could touch something, and it didn't hurt. No man yelled, no hand came down, nothing shattered. Thomas gave her the faintest nod. Approval, not praise. The kind that says, "You're doing fine," without adding pressure. And for a second, just a flicker, her lips curved. Not a smile, not yet, but the shape of one waiting to be born. The saddle creaked beneath her, and for a moment, everything in her tensed. Legs, jaw, breath. The leather under her thighs reminded her too much of reins she'd once felt on her back, not in her hands. Of commands shouted, not asked. But Thomas didn't rush her. He stood beside the horse like a shadow that wouldn't move unless she needed it to. The sun above was mild, but the wind picked up in little gusts, tugging at the ends of her hair. "Hold her steady," he said, nodding to the reins. She did, shaky at first but firm, her knuckles white, her breath shallow. "Let her walk when you're ready." He didn't climb up himself, didn't lead her, just opened the gate. She thought she would be afraid, but the mare walked slow and steady under her, like she knew the girl's body carried ghosts. Step by step, they left the yard, out into the open, where the wind carried the scent of dust and mesquite, and the hills rose like quiet sentinels in the distance. And then, the strangest thing, her body stopped bracing. She loosened the reins. Let the mare lead. The wind came again, stronger this time, but it didn't slam into her like a blow. It wrapped around her, moved through her clothes, brushed her cheeks. She blinked, not sure what this feeling was. It wasn't fear, or sadness, or the sharp panic she knew too well. It was something quieter, almost clean. Behind her, Thomas followed at a slow trot. He didn't call out, didn't tell her she was doing well, but she felt it anyway. And in the space between hoofbeats, in the long breath of the sky, she thought, maybe this is what gentle feels like. Maybe not being touched didn't mean being alone. Maybe someday she'd turn her head, reach out her hand, and not flinch. The fire crackled low, its glow barely lighting the space between them. They sat on opposite sides of it, as they always did, close enough to share warmth, far enough for her to breathe. The night was cool but not cold, quiet but not empty. Crickets sang somewhere beyond the brush, and the stars scattered above like broken glass, distant and watching. She wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The coarse wool scratched her collarbone, but she didn't mind. It reminded her she was real, awake. Thomas stirred the fire with a long stick, nudging a log into place. Sparks lifted into the night like tiny, desperate souls. He hadn't said much since dinner. He never did. And she'd come to find comfort in that silence, in the way he didn't fill it with questions or force the shape of her wounds into something small and speakable. Her gaze dropped to his hands, broad, calloused, unmoving now on his knee. They didn't look like the hands that had once hurt her. And maybe that was why, slowly, almost against her own instincts, she shifted closer, half a step, then another. He didn't move, not even when her knee brushed his. The fire popped. She could hear her heartbeat now, not like thunder, but like a question. Do you trust him? She didn't know, but she wanted to. Her hand, half hidden by the blanket, trembled as she laid it down on the dirt beside his. Close. Close enough to feel the heat from his skin. And then, with fingers as careful as if she were touching a flame, she moved just an inch more and let her hand rest on top of his. Thomas didn't flinch. didn't even look at her. He simply turned his palm, slowly, and let their fingers intertwine. No pressure, no pull, just presence. A quiet, open space that said, "You're safe." And in that moment, she realized something she hadn't dared to believe. She'd reached first, and the world hadn't ended. The morning light filtered softly through the window, casting pale stripes across the wooden floor. She sat by the small kitchen table, tracing the grain of the wood with restless fingers. Outside, the wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying a promise she hadn't dared to hope for. Thomas moved silently behind her, bringing a tin cup of coffee. He placed it on the table without a word and stepped back into the doorway, watching. She looked up, surprised. The coffee was bitter, but the warmth seeped into her palms like a quiet comfort. "Thank you," she whispered, voice fragile but honest. He nodded, stepping closer, his shadow stretching long and calm. A stray breeze caught the curtain, sending it fluttering like a shy bird. She smiled, a real one, unguarded and soft. It was the first time since she could remember. Her laughter came unexpectedly later that afternoon. They were working in the fields, Thomas teaching her how to mend a fence. She stumbled over the stubborn wire, and when she finally freed her fingers, she let out a breathless chuckle. Thomas looked at her with surprise, then amusement. "That's the first time I've heard you laugh." She blushed but didn't stop. The sound was light and free, like a secret spilled after years of silence. For a moment, the past, the fear, the pain, seemed to loosen its grip. And in that small, fleeting joy, they found a new beginning. The fire crackled softly, sending flickering shadows dancing across the rough, wooden walls of the cabin. Outside, the night pressed close, silent and thick with the scent of pine and earth. They sat close on the worn bench, their bodies just inches apart, but the distance between their souls still felt vast. She traced the edge of the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the flames, which seemed to hold all the secrets of the world. Thomas cleared his throat, breaking the quiet. "You don't have to say anything you're not ready for." She looked up, surprise flickering in her gaze. "Why do you stay?" "After everything," he shrugged, a small, sad smile tugging at his lips. "Because sometimes the hardest scars aren't the ones you can see." She swallowed hard, the weight of years pressing down, but something about his calm presence made the ache a little lighter. Slowly, words came, not about the past she feared to name, but about the dreams she'd almost forgotten. And Thomas shared pieces of his own broken history, his voice low and steady. They didn't need to fix each other tonight, just to be there, together. The fire burned low, but the warmth between them grew. And in that fragile silence, a promise was born, that no matter how deep the pain, gentle hands could help heal even the wildest heart. The dawn was shy, spilling pale light through the cracks in the cabin walls. She lay awake, tangled in thoughts as restless as the wind outside. For the first time, she felt the stirrings of something new, a fragile trust growing in the shadows of her fear. Thomas sat quietly nearby, repairing a worn saddle, his hands steady and sure. She watched him from the edge of the bed, heart pounding in a rhythm unfamiliar and strange. Her lips parted, almost against her will, and a soft sound escaped. "Thomas." The name felt heavy, like a promise, like a step into a world she'd long kept locked away. He looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes, then something gentler, warmer. "Yeah?" he said simply. She hesitated, then closed the distance, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for not giving up." He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, his touch light, careful. "No one worth trusting should ever be rushed," he murmured. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibilities and hope. The dusty road stretched ahead under a wide, pale sky as they rode side by side. The town was a distant promise, a place of noise and strangers, of challenges neither had faced before. She gripped the reins tightly, heart pounding, not from fear, but anticipation. Thomas glanced at her, a quiet strength in his eyes. "Ready for this?" She nodded, though her voice caught on the edge. "I want to try." The townsfolk's curious gazes followed them, whispers riding the dry air. She felt exposed, like a wildflower plucked from the earth. But Thomas's steady presence was an anchor, grounding her in a world that still felt too sharp. They stopped at the general store. She hesitated at the door, then took a breath and stepped inside. The smell of leather and tobacco, the hum of voices, overwhelming yet alive. She met the shopkeeper's eyes, then turned to Thomas. For the first time, she saw him not just as her protector, but as her partner. Together they faced the world, uncertain but united. And in that unity, she found courage to dream of a life beyond pain. The sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. Back at the ranch, they sat on the porch steps, silence stretching comfortably between them. She watched Thomas as he whittled a piece of wood, his hands steady and calm. The air was cool, filled with the scent of sage and fresh earth. For the first time, she didn't feel the old weight pressing down on her chest. Instead, a gentle warmth spread inside, fragile but real. Without thinking, she reached out, brushing her fingers lightly against his. He looked up, surprise melting into a small, understanding smile. No words were needed. In that touch, 1,000 unspoken promises passed between them, of patience, of healing, and of slowly learning what gentle means. The night deepened around them, stars blinking awake like distant hopes. And in the quiet, broken pieces of the past began to mend. Morning light spilled softly through the cabin window, casting a warm glow on their faces. They sat close, the silence between them no longer heavy but full of unspoken understanding. She reached up, tracing the lines of his weathered face with gentle fingers. Thomas met her gaze, eyes clear and steady. "I never thought I could feel safe," she whispered. "You've been safe all along," he replied, his voice soft but certain. Outside, the world awoke, the birds singing, the wind rustling the trees, a promise of new beginnings. Hand in hand, they stepped out onto the porch, ready to face whatever the future held, together.